Today's episode of the Byword is an absolute scream. While the Big Talk welcomes back the Spooktacular Drew Edwards, Nerd Nightmare heads to the placid little town of Woodsboro. Get your popcorn ready. Welcome to a quintessentially October episode of the Nerd Byword, the only podcast that goes outside of their comfort zone to tackle their greatest fears in the name of friendship, fandom, and download numbers. Today's Byword Big Talk welcomes returning guest Drew Edwards, writer and creator of Halloween Man and Lucy Chaplin, Science Starlet. There is a content warning for that segment. If you are an insecure male listener whose very existence is placed into jeopardy simply by strong female characters occupying the same spaces, then you clearly lack basic comprehension skills and have been listening to the wrong podcast for a very long time. All jokes aside, it was great catching up with Drew and his exciting new endeavors, but first, it's time to keep you brief on the biggest news in nerddom with Nerd News! Dave, this was going to be my selection for this week, so I'm glad to see you find it poignant as well.
Not just poignant, but also I think it harkens back to something that we've talked about several times in the last few months on this pod. So it kind of bears digging back into. So Deadline is reporting that James Earl Jones has basically retired from the role of voicing Darth Vader in the Star Wars franchise. This shouldn't be a horrible shock, all things considered. The man has been doing the job for like 40 years at this point, and he is 91. So it seems like it might be time for him to start slowly stepping back a little bit. I know that he's been still pretty busy. Most recently, I think he appeared in Coming to America, the sequel to Coming to America without a number in it. As the king and father of Eddie Murphy's character. But that's not the most interesting thing of the story, although, let's go ahead and just be honest. James Earl Jones is, an absolutely iconic actor, and, realizing that he is not going to be not just, voicing Darth Vader anymore, but is likely, taking a step back from acting slowly in general, it's really the end of an era in a lot of ways. I mean, he's just an absolutely class act and just a fantastic actor. But what is also really, really interesting is, according to Vanity Fair, that Jones has basically signed over the rights to his voice to filmmakers using AI technology to make sure that Lucasfilm would be able to keep Darth Vader's character alive. According to Matthew Wood, he had mentioned, Jones, he was looking into winding down this particular character. So how do we move forward? And that forward momentum, of course, seems to be that any future appearances of Darth Vader will be, electronically generated, very similar to what they did to sort of de-age Mark Hamill's voice for Book of Boba Fett, which is not actually a de-aging. It's not, from my understanding, that Hamill recorded new lines. It is that basically they have this sort of elaborate AI system, and they feed that AI system all sorts of lines that were previously recorded in sort of the voice that they're aiming for, and then this AI spits out new lines. And that's essentially what they're going to be doing with James Earl Jones. Interestingly enough, there's been a lot of kind of back and forth with, sort of contradictory reporting about how exactly Darth Vader was voiced in Obi-Wan Kenobi, with some people pointing towards this AI technology likely having been used already on Obi-Wan Kenobi. And with, Vader's voice, James Earl Jones's voice kind of going through like this filter to make it sound a little, electronic and everything, it's a natural voice to do something like this with, because it's much harder to see the sort of the rough edges, or hear the rough edges rather, in the technology, which was a little more difficult, I think, with Luke Skywalker, because that voice was a little stilted, I guess is the best word to use. A little not electronic sounding, but perhaps a bit emotionless, might be a good way to put it. So on the one hand, sad because Jones is retiring from the role. On the other hand, troubling a little bit that we're once again going down the AI computer-generated rabbit hole, and that this character and Jones's voice are going to be kept alive, even beyond his passing. And then, on the other hand, better again. See, I have three hands today. On the other hand, better again, because at least in this particular case, they have the permission of the actor to do this, which is perhaps a little different from, let's say, what they did with our friend Grand Moff Tarkin in Rogue One. Obviously, there's no way for Peter Cushing to have signed over his voice and likeness for CGI generated Return from the Grave, if that technology didn't exist yet by the time he passed. But still, it's at least a little more comfortable. It's just a lot of conflicted feelings here, Chris. What are your thoughts?
Is that third hand an artificial replacement, a prosthetic, a robotic hand?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm deeply conflicted by this. At first, I didn't see the second part of that. I just saw the headline and before researching it further. So I just saw this as, giving James Earl Jones as, for all intents and purposes, the voice of our childhood. Not only as Darth Vader, but also as Mufasa. Like, that was one of the most formative, films of my youth, is The Lion King. And, to see him hang it up, it just really made me super reflective. And then my next initial thought was like, okay, this is awesome, because he's clearly the only Darth Vader voice that we'll ever have and never should have. And so maybe we can move on to something new, but leave it to Star Wars to prove me wrong. So beholden to past characters. As excited as I am for something like Ahsoka, which is getting the band back together from Star Wars Rebels, one of the most, it's ironic that it takes place in the same time as like the Rebellion and the original trilogy, because it still feels like it was the most forward momentum with new characters and new storylines. And so seeing Ahsoka, dive back into that is really, really exciting. But for the vast majority of the Star Wars universe, we are still circling the drain of yesteryear, and it's deeply troubling, because I want to be a bigger Star Wars fan than I am, but it's like, can we move forward? It's just the same old, and we are so deathly afraid of recasting. And I'm in no way, shape, or form want this to be misunderstood as recasting the voice of Darth Vader, but like, how much more do we need from this Skywalker saga? Can we please move on? Andor premiered this week as the time of recording, and the first two episodes were a lot of groundwork, and that's probably why they released all three to begin with. But that third episode, man, that really packed a punch, and so I'm really excited to see new stories. And Diego Luna is already saying, like, this is it, this is the last time I'm playing the character, this is done. And I think we shouldn't be so afraid of having complete stories and then moving on to something else.
And even within the Star Wars universe, I think that's absolutely valid. We have our Skywalker saga. Let's move beyond that. Let's do something different. We've talked about that, quite a bit. The Star Wars universe, for a lack of better term, that's has sprung forth from George Lucas's original movie, is, I think,
which is solely contained on 3 planets.
Yeah, there is a potential there, and partially because of exactly that. The scope, I think, of what Lucas did was never quite as big as he could have gone. I mean, the universe is very, very interesting, I guess, in that you have a few planets that keep popping up, like Tatooine, and every planet apparently only has one ecosystem. Like there's an ice planet, there's a desert planet, there's a lava planet, you know. But even within that, I think there's just so much opportunity to tell stories within the Star Wars universe that have not been told before. But because we are so beholden to the past and nostalgia, that is just not something that is really happening. And look, there are things that make Star Wars quintessentially Star Wars, and I don't want those things to be completely abandoned. And I would go so far as to say that the stuff that they put out that takes place during the reign of the Empire feels more like Star Wars than anything else. I think there's a reason that Rogue One, for example, worked so well, and why we're sitting here now with an Andor series. I think there is something quintessentially Star Wars about having an underdog situation, and maybe that is one of the things that resonated a lot less with the Disney-produced sequel trilogy, is that they were trying to recreate this underdog feeling, and yet at the same time, you know, Leia was basically a general in the New Republic. Like, it's if you're the governing, you know, body, it doesn't feel like you're the underdog against this First Order, right? So I think there's something quintessentially like, you know, bad government underdogs fighting against it. That's very, very Star Wars. And so those kinds of stories can still be told, even if you move, you know, beyond the Skywalker saga. You can talk about, you know, planetary government. You can focus on a particular sector. I mean, there's all sorts of things you can do to tell these Star Wars underdog stories. Those are the ones that work best. This is why the original trilogy, I think, in a lot of ways is still superior to a lot of the other stuff that's been put out. It's just the underdog stories. That's why, like, I think Rebels, from what I've seen, better than the Clone Wars. It's that underdog feeling. It's very Star Wars, and why I'm looking forward to watching Andor, which I have not done yet. But, you know, that time period lends itself to that kind of storytelling very well.
And I think I don't want to put too much of the cart before the horse, because I want to give it its full-fledged nerd commendation when we head to November. But to use like an analogy from like the music world, is what I appreciate about Andor and Rogue One and stories like that and Rebels is like they're like that indie band that you kind of see live and like you latch onto, and they have this indefinable like similarity to other bands that you love, and you just like love to watch them rise. But then you have, you know, something like the sequel trilogy, which is just like a bad cover band. Like it's the same old, and it's nothing any original. You're just playing the hits, but it's not even the original people playing it. So it's and then you have like the de-aged Mark Hamill is just like the Rolling Stones on their 58th farewell tour. It's just like we don't need that. So yeah, I can't wait for you to watch Andor and talk about it in a few weeks.
Oh yeah, I think it's also interesting that the expanded universe, yes, I know, I'm an expanded universe guy. They felt that as well. You know, the idea that maybe it's just the same old, and they did some interesting things. Initially, first with saying, okay, the Empire has fallen, but there's this Imperial remnant, and now they're, you know, the underdogs, and they are the ones that are using these tactics against the rightful government. And what's that like? You know, and that was interesting. And even then they were like, okay, if we're going to keep doing Star Wars, then what else can we do? Okay, let's do an invasion from like this uncharted space of this species that we've never encountered before. And what does that look like? You know, so they did try, in the expanded universe, at least, as they push these characters forward, you know, Luke, Han, Leia, they at least, you know, try to change the Star Warsy scenario, you know. I sometimes wish they would try something like that now, you know, like just try a different scenario within that world. But it is what it is. But that brings us, I think, just full circle back to just saying, you know, James Earl Jones, thank you for 40 years of Darth Vader. You know, your actual voice, not computer generated, will be, you know, very, very much missed. All right, Kris, what is your news story this week? What have you got?
Well, I learned a lot of pronunciational things. First and foremost, the name of this event is Tudum. So Netflix, apparently I missed this last year, but Netflix has its own DC fandom type event. Which
is hilarious considering DC doesn't have fandom anymore.
Right. So they revealed a lot of news and trailers and first looks and all of this stuff. So I'm going to give you the quick hits here. Enola Holmes 2 got a new trailer, which if you didn't watch the first film, I highly recommend it. I don't know if it's a nerd commendation. I think Sherlock Holmes is nerdy. Maybe we'll come back and revisit that later on. But Henry Cavill as Sherlock Holmes was so cool to see. Just so cool. And looks like they're going to be teaming up again here with Millie Bobby Brown and Henry Cavill. Super exciting. In the very meh department, Gal Gadot is in a spy thriller called Heart of Stone. That's coming sometime in 2023. I neglected to mention that Enola Holmes 2 is streaming on November the 4th of this year. Bridgerton gets a spinoff, do your thing. We got more clips and footage from the Jenna Ortega Tim Burton collab Wednesday, the Addams Family spinoff. That's going to arrive on Netflix November the 23rd. And we got some Guillermo del Toro being Guillermo del Toro with his Pinocchio take. This is fresh off the heels of the Disney Plus live action remake. That is going to start streaming December the 9th. Jennifer Lopez is an assassin because, that'll come in May 2023. The one that Dave and I both are dying to see, coming in November, The Witcher Blood Origin, starring the central deity in my universe, Michelle Yeoh, as an elf, because that's freaking awesome. We didn't get any extended footage. We've only had one trailer that was a teaser last year around December. So we're still coasting on vibes and anticipation for that. They cloned Tyrone with Jamie Foxx, John Boyega, and Tiana Paris. Looks absolutely hilarious. And it reminds me that I need to check out Day Shift because it looks super funny. Another big one that you and I will love, Dave, season 3 of The Witcher is coming summer 2023. Didn't get any footage, but we're headed there. Let's see. Glass Onion is coming out in December. We got some more footage for that. That's the Knives Out sequel from Rian Johnson. Looks amazing. Hellbound. Don't know what that is, but it's coming back for season 2. So lots to love here. Dave, what are you most excited for?
So you're probably going to be shocked. Would you like to venture a guess what I would be most excited for?
That would be The Witcher.
Nope. Yeah, I mean, I'm psyched that there's season 3 of The Witcher coming, and I'm psyched that there's a movie in that universe featuring Michelle Yeoh. I think she's amazing. But dude, the most exciting thing is Del Toro's Pinocchio. Have you looked at any behind the scenes footage that's been released to that?
No.
It is stop motion animation. It is not CGI. It is stop motion animation. They went old school. They built the sets, they built the figures, and it is stop motion animation. And I am a huge nerd for stop motion animation, going all the way back to my very first encounter with stop motion when I saw the original Clash of the Titans back in the day. Ray Harryhausen, animating skeletons as special effects to have a sword fight with real people. It just blew my mind. I love stop motion animation. I love it, especially for quote unquote like animated films. The idea that it's not a special effect that is interacting with real human beings. There is just something weighty about it, I guess is the best. It has a weight. It has a physical presence. There's a physicality to stop motion animation that even hand drawn animation or CG animation don't quite capture. And I really, really, really like stop motion. And so seeing just the other day, like time of this recording yesterday, I saw some behind the scenes footage and I was like, holy crap. I heard that Del Toro was working on a Pinocchio, and I'm a big Del Toro fan to begin with. But that they're using stop motion animation absolutely blew my mind. So I am incredibly excited to see stop motion Pinocchio animation. Like, I'm not even that big of a Pinocchio fan, but just because this is stop motion animation and Del Toro is involved, I'm all over this, man. So yeah, the Witcher stuff is fairly exciting. But man, Pinocchio stop motion animation with Del Toro is just, what a combination. I'm all over that. It's like it was tailor made for me.
I should have known. That was a lapse in judgment on my part that you would love the weird stuff. And I mean that endearingly, because I've seen. I'll say this: Del Toro, I respect the hustle. Um, but maybe I'll feel differently. I remember my college Spanish classes were obsessed with Pan's Labyrinth, and it weirded the crap out of me. Maybe I'll feel differently if I revisit it.
It's hilarious that you mentioned that. I think a lot of that has to do with your aversion to scary stuff, which we are still trying to cure. But Pan's Labyrinth just was one of those movies that absolutely blew me away when I first saw it. It just, there again too, the creature effects, all that, the makeup, the physical presence of it, the melancholy, the fact that you're not quite sure how much of what is happening is real or is happening in this little girl's imagination. There's so much there. It's a very sad film, but at the same time, it's sumptuous. It's a visual feast, and it's just a beautiful piece of storytelling. It's probably in my top 10 favorite movies of all time. I absolutely adored Pan's Labyrinth.
I think that might have been, as the optimistic person as I try to be, I think it was just left me sad. I think that's probably the lasting effect of it.
Yeah, and I think that is definitely something he was going for with that movie, and it's definitely not a movie I would revisit all the time. Exactly for that. I'm a big feels guy when I watch a movie or something and it resonates with me, or I read a book, and characters are going through something that I feel I have big feelings afterwards. So, so it's not something that I revisit frequently. But when I find myself in the right headspace for it, I love putting on Pan's Labyrinth. It's just so fantastic. So yeah, I'm a big Del Toro fan. I liked his Hellboy movies as well, and I'm really sad that he never got to finish his trilogy there either. And they decided to reboot to not very successful effect there either. And I honestly think, and this might be a sacrilege, I'm not the biggest Lord of the Rings fan, but I have watched the movies, and I did watch the Hobbit movies as well. And Del Toro was initially the guy working on the Hobbit movies. It was supposed to be 2 movies, and he was doing like all the pre-production stuff and everything, and then he kind of walked away from it. And Peter Jackson jumped back in and made the movies. And I still imagine what it would have been like to have a Del Toro directed, 2 Hobbit movies rather than 3. That stretching is just awful. So I'm a big Del Toro fan, and I think even his misfires are at least interesting. So I'm a big fan, and so I'm all about this Pinocchio thing, man.
I would have loved to have seen that. I had no idea. And I said this on social media the other day, is just like, a lot of people are criticizing the Rings of Power for being slow moving. I'm like, have you read Tolkien? Have you read The Lord of the Rings? But I think
what do you need right now is a musical interlude featuring Tom Bombadil, and then everybody's gonna be good, right? Like, that's what we need.
Listen, what I truly love, and I appreciate Peter Jackson and his vision and bringing it back to the forefront. In the last 20 years, Lord of the Rings has been right at the forefront of fandom, and a lot of that is due to Peter Jackson and his films. At the same time, he had a chokehold on that IP, and I think what made those films, it's particularly The Hobbit, because I think the original trilogy of the Lord of the Rings was good, was great, but it sometimes can take you out because he leans into the pageantry of it all. And so it does not feel as approachable. And what I love about the Rings of Power is it cuts through all of that, and it still has like the splendor of everything, but you can immediately identify with some of these characters. And I think it's a much updated 2022 take on Tolkien, which is great. And you immediately are in love with so many of these characters, and you are rooting for them, and you're devastated when things don't go their way. And I think that's a much, much more updated look on the franchise.
Well, and I think that's always been one of my biggest problems with trying to approach the Lord of the Rings, is that the characters don't feel quite real, I guess is the best way to put it. And so I'm a character guy. I prefer like having really, characters that feel drawn from life to a certain extent. and then you can put them in these fantastical situations, and their reactions have to be real and relatable, and then I can get into a given story. I like The Hobbit, the book The Hobbit, a whole lot better than the Lord of the Rings books. I'm a big fan of The Hobbit. You can tell that Tolkien was writing for a different audience.
It's much more character driven, The Hobbit,
and much, I think, simpler in some ways.
Yes.
I think it was very much like a young adult kind of book. Something that was aimed at a much younger audience than I think the Lord of the Rings was, and I think it works in its favor, which is why the Hobbit movies in particular were such a disappointment for me, because I don't think they clicked in the way the book did, and I think it needed somebody else. I think that The Hobbit feels different from the Lord of the Rings, and so having Peter Jackson come back and do those was not a good move. It needed to feel different. Plus, you said that Peter Jackson's had a chokehold on this franchise. I think vice versa is true as well. I get the impression sometimes, especially when you see some of the behind the scenes footage of the Hobbit movies, that I think that this franchise has had a chokehold on Peter Jackson. And I don't think he had any intention of coming back and doing The Hobbit, and was kind of strong-armed into it. They just threw so much money at him that he couldn't say no. But he just when you look at the behind-the-scenes footage of the original trilogy of Lord of the Rings, and then you see the Hobbit trilogy footage behind the scenes, he just looks tired, man. Like, he just looks like he's about had it.
All right, that wraps up Nerd News. What are you most excited about from Netflix's catalog? And what is your thoughts on James Earl Jones hanging it up, but not really, I guess? When we come back from this, our first break, Drew Edwards makes his Spooktacular return. Welcome back to this week's big time segment. You know it as our byword. And we are joined by an illustrious returning guest. You will remember Drew Edwards. He is the writer-creator of Halloween Man and Lucy Chaplin's Science Starlet. He's a cast member on the Castle of Horror podcast, Ringo Awards nominee, Best of Austin winner. Drew Edwards, thank you so much for coming back, Drew.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So, Drew, you reached out and said that you had some big news that you wanted to share with us. What is bringing you back to the Byword today?
Well, as people who have followed my career and followed Halloween Man for the last decade, they'll know that we have had a home, a happy home for the most part, at Comixology, which is the digital platform on a lot of respects. But other, people who follow comic book industry news will also know that they were merged with Amazon Kindle last October.
The debacle when they updated that. Oh my God.
Yes. And without spending too much time, on that, the ins and outs of that, just saying that created a lot of stresses in my life. So I have spent the better part of a year reaching out to different publishers and different digital platforms and things like that, and just kind of putting out that it needs to be known that I am looking for a new home for my characters. It ended in some interesting conversations. I talked to some of the biggest publishers in the comic book industry, but ultimately the people that I was most impressed with is a digital startup called Global Comix. That's Comix with an X. I wasn't necessarily trying to stay in the digital wing of the comic book industry, but they have offered me, the most creative freedom, the most sort of bang for your buck. And because of this, what is going to be happening, probably by the time this podcast is out, is you can go to Global Comix, you can search Halloween Man comics, and you will be able to find the entire back catalog of Halloween Man available on Global Comics for free. Yeah, I am a big believer in comic outreach. One of the things that I do at conventions is when I print something up, I don't print single issues. I print up an entire storyline because I know people they like to read it that way. They especially if they're trying something new, they want to be able to dig in and get a complete story. So this is kind of going to be the digital version of that. Like if you have never read Halloween Man, this is your chance to dive in and really look at this universe of characters, and you can do it while also trying out this amazing new digital platform that has a heavy focus on indies.
And so in talking before we hit the record button, Global Comics is an entity that's very much still in its infancy. I think you said it was about a year old. So
Yeah.
What is your experience with that? What can you tell us about the platform?
Well, it's an interesting combination because in a lot of respects, it's a place you can go and read comics, and you can read them either in a guided format similar to Guided View on Comixology, or you can download PDFs, and there's thousands of options, from stuff as mainstream as Top Cow and Valiant to a lot of Japanese manga to people who are small press. So you have all these options, but there's also this element of social media to it, because it's also a way for fans to interact with creators. Every publisher has a comment section on the issues that they put up, so they can interact with their fans. Fans can leave questions about the issues right there on the issue. And it's designed also that you can share as easy as possible through other social media platforms, like even things like Discord and stuff like that. So it's this combination. It's sort of like if Comixology and Facebook had a baby. And I was really impressed with the forward thinkingness of this. Like that is why, of all the people that I talked to, I was like, I want to get in with these guys, because it was the chance to get on the ground floor of something, and B, this to me is the next evolution of what digital comics are, because it's now not just a place where your comic books can live, on like some sort of digital cloud. It's a new way for fan and creator interaction, which we sort of started to evolve in the pandemic. But these guys have really taken that frame of thought and really just put it together in a elegant fashion. And it's because I know some of what's down on the pipeline, like for example, they're going to have a new app in 2023. It's interesting to see the evolution of that. And I think when people go check this out, they're going to be like, wow, this really opens up my whole world as far as my comics fandom. But it also gives you the chance to really dig into small press creators, indie creators, because that's right now where their focus is. Even with Comixology, as good as they were with indie comics for quite a while, they still always gave a little bit more prevalence to Marvel, DC, and Image, where right now that's not so much the case with Global. Like they're really they're really pushing indies.
It was really cool, just in doing the very, very preliminary homework in prep for this episode. Longtime listeners of our podcast will remember that Jason Douglas, the writer of Parallel, from Source Point Press, was our very first creator interview over 2 years ago. And so seeing Source Point Press being involved in Global Comics, in addition to as the names that you mentioned, Pop Cow and Valiant, was really, really cool. Something I wanted to point on that you had talked about was creator rights, and that's a real hot button issue in comic books as a medium. When you have screen adaptations, creators' rights, even with novelization, with certain Star Wars extended universe authors coming out. I'm blanking on names, but like creators' rights is a real hot button issue right now. How do you think Global Comics is taking that as an initiative?
Well, again, I don't want to turn this into a dishing the dirt on the last few years of what it was like to work with Comixology, but I with my initial conversations with them with the Global Comics guys, I did have to ask them. I was like, well, what is censorship going to be like on this? And he was like, well, we watch stuff that goes up, obviously, and we have an internal rating system and everything, and you can flag stuff as not safe for work as well. But
I did see that on some of your submissions there. So
yeah, but they also said, we will treat you like an adult, and we will, we're not going to tell you, no, you can't put out this comic under most circumstances. And because I've dealt with some very absurd censorship. Like, for an example I can give is there was a Lucy comic that came out a few years ago, and we had a sexy looking outfit on it, but like she was still more covered than even Wonder Woman is. But because she's a plus size woman, and the way she's built, I was told that they were going to have to bump it up and on the age rating. And I did it. I'm a team player, and I definitely don't want to make people feel uncomfortable, but I also kind of feel like that was a bit absurd, and also fat phobic, fear of women's bodies, whatever you want to call it, a bit strange to me. And I've even had issues with that when I'm posting my stuff on certain social media platforms, that if I post a picture of Lucy, that I know if it was a less buxom, not plus sized woman, I wouldn't be getting flagged for stuff, because like Black Canary can run around in basically a dominatrix outfit, but because she's built like a Victoria's Secret model, it's not quote unquote fetish artwork. So that was like a something that I was very vocal in talking to these guys about. I told them about those experiences, and they were like, look, this is your artistic vision, you are on the same page with us, we want to be good partners. And plus, they had seen the comic, and they knew what I was going for, and that I'm not just randomly putting out smut or whatever. So that was a nice feeling. That I wasn't going to have to deal with a lot of bureaucratic red tape, and that the control was also put back into my hands. Another nice thing about Global, and this is away from the censorship issue, but I select my release dates. Comixology, with dealing with them, they were the one that would always, like, I would submit a comic, and then they would, either they would come to me and they would be like, we have this date, can you fill a comic in there? Or I would submit something and they would say, okay, we're going to release it this day. Whereas like with Global, I literally am the one that, inputs the comic, and I decide then and there, this is going to be released when I want it. And that gives me more time to think about like how I'm going to promote something, how I'm going to, get the word out about it. um, and there's also real-time analytics on it. Like there's only a few comics that are up there because again, I'm putting up a lot of back catalog right now, and we're in late September. But the ones that are up there, I can go on there and I can tell you how many people have read it so far, because
Right.
yeah. And whereas like with Comixology, I would have to wait 3-4 months to get that information. So there's just a lot of stuff about the way this is run that is sort of putting the control back into the creator's hands and giving you the information that you need quicker, better. And that's all very empowering. So much of the time in publishing, you as a creator are kind of left at the whims of the people that are putting out your stuff, and because you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you, you keep your mouth shut. But this has a very pro creator, sort of liberal minded attitude about giving the creator a lot of control.
And it's really cool. Like, it's a very friendly interface, very user friendly. And you mentioned the analytics, and it's like the nerds that we are. Like, even as a spectator, I just created in prep for the episode a Byword account on there, but I can even see those analytics, and I can see how many people have viewed the Halloween Man comics, and that's just really cool from like a number crunching nerd kind of aspect.
Well, and that stuff is important because, when you're doing, small press, indie, whatever you want to call it, that every reader counts. And, I was part of Comixology Unlimited. And the thing that I found frustrating about that is I didn't know how many individual readers I was getting. I just knew how many times something was read. Whereas this will tell me, like, if I want to know if it's one person reading the book 20 times or if it's 20 different people, I'm gonna know because I can get that information, and I can get that information today if I want it. And again, just very empowering. That's the sort of stuff that impressed me because I've been doing this 22 years. I've been around the block. I've dealt with big publishers, I've dealt with small publishers, and these guys impress the hell out of me. Like, I'm glad to be partnering up with them because they're people that believe in the future of comics and that comics are for everybody, which is nice and refreshing. And because there's so much doom and gloom. If you get on the Twitter, like the Twitter, I sound like such an old
the
man,
Twitter,
right? The Twitter. When you get on the Twitter,
that reminds me of I think it was the proposal. Betty White said that. Lord rest her.
R.I.P. Betty White. But yeah, if you jump on social media, you'll see probably dozens of people like, oh, the comic book industry is going to die. And let me tell you, the comic book industry has been supposedly dying since the 90s.
Right.
So, like, if this is a death, it is a slow, agonizing death. So it's kind of nice to deal with people that are almost like futurists about comics, and they're like, no, we think comics have a future, and we're gonna be a part of crafting that.
Yeah, and it really, looking at this data and everything, it reminds me of how I look at like our host, our podcast host, Podbean, is I have the app and I look at our data, I look at our download numbers, I look at where we're downloaded around the world, just as the geographical social studies nerd that I am. It's just like, and you take that in and you formulate that, you see what podcast platform is getting us the most traffic, and you just formulate that. And so I can imagine as a creator, getting that information is so paramount to your future endeavors and where you want to go from here.
Yeah. It tells me what people are, what they're reading the most is, and I can know almost as soon as something comes out whether or not it's a hit or a bomb. or something in between. Most things are something in between, but you know, and again, the fact that I have all my stuff up there, and I will have all my stuff up there, and it's all going to be for free. This is encouraging you not only to try out my comics, but also to try out this platform, which I believe, if you can't tell by the level of enthusiasm that I'm projecting here, I very wholeheartedly believe in what Global Comics is doing.
And here, sitting and looking at the website, they have Global Comics Gold. I assume that's a subscription service for $7.99. Yes. First month, I'm being advertised as $1.99. So that's something you probably want to get up on the ground level for.
Yes, you know, again, I am happy. I'm just happy as a pig in mud to be on the ground floor with this. I think that this is going to be an amazing evolution of digital comics.
All right, we've tap danced around this, but some of our listeners may need a brief refresher. What's the elevator pitch for Halloween Man?
So Halloween Man is best described as the weird adventures of a zombie superhero and his sexy mad scientist girlfriend as they battle everything from vegetarian vampires, a Loch Ness monster, steampunk mummy pirates, the Invisible Man. We even have a Christmas special. It's very quirky. I often say it's a little bit Evil Dead 2 and a little bit Fantastic Four. So you know, if you always wish, if you're a big Silver Age fan, but you always wish that the main character ate the bad guys, you know, this is the comic for you.
So, if memory serves, Lucy Chaplin is a very personal character for you. We had, I think I called it a three-headed monster in our last visit. We didn't get to talk about her near enough. Dave and I are both very big proponents of strong female characters, and we are not threatened. We are not emasculated by them in any form or fashion. So, tell us all about Lucy.
So, Lucy Chaplin, Science Starlet, is Halloween, the aforementioned sexy mad scientist girlfriend. Although, like, she's not so much mad. I would say she's more of a Doc Savage, Reed Richards, but in a gothy burlesque dancer's body. You know, she's not crazed, but she is the smartest woman in the world, smartest person in her world, really, point of fact. She is a champion power lifter. She is a plus size model, and she is a billionaire philanthropist and a polymath genius. So she's super intelligent and she's good at everything. So this character has existed in the Halloween Man comics since the very beginning, but I always envisioned the character as a plus size woman. And for whatever reason, again, this is almost too much backstory to go into at this point, but for whatever reason, I had a very difficult time getting artists to draw her like that. So about, I want to say 7 years ago, we did a storyline called Eye of the Beholder, which will be available on Global Comics very soon. And it remodeled Lucy, and it made it character development that she looked like how I envisioned her. Now, the other part of Lucy that is very personal, Lucy is very much taken from my wife, Jamie, Jamie Barr, who is a musician. She's in her own band, Danger Cakes. She also is in a queer grass band called Brand New Key. She is also the executive director of Girls Rock Austin, which is a nonprofit that is dedicated to empowering girls, trans, and non-binary youth. So, you know, she's a polymath in her own way. Like what is amazing about Jamie is that if you can lay out a skill and say you need to learn this for some reason, 99% of the time she can do that. And I did not initially say, like, hey, artists, draw Lucy like Jamie. Actually, a good friend of mine who has been an off and on artist on Halloween Man is the one that my friend Terry Parr is actually the artist was like, well, I'm just going to draw her looking like Jamie, because like Jamie has this great sort of pinup inspired sense of fashion. And so a lot of the times when we were looking for an outfit for Lucy, I would just say, draw this dress, draw this outfit. And, Terry was just like, well, I'm just going to draw Jamie because Jamie has a good look for this character. And, I was like, you know what, I was already at the point where I was using, sort of Jamie-isms to inspire Lucy's dialogue. And Jamie is very much my muse when it comes to that character. So now, in this very weird, like, art becoming life becoming art kind of thing, Jamie now goes to conventions. She will with me. She will cosplay as the character. She actually just voiced it on our Indiegogo video for the crowdfund that we just did. Jamie just voiced the character for the very first time. The character has had audible dialogue, and so she's had to kind of the character has and her have like grown into this world together, and the character became so popular we started giving her own spin-offs. We did an initial one, I believe, in 2015. We did a follow-up called Hellhole, which was about werewolf bikers a couple of years after that. And then just last year, we did a crossover with Terry Parr's comic, Aerobicide. And there's another Lucy comic in the works as we record this interview, because the character is hands down the most popular character in the comic.
That sound that you hear, listeners, is the collective craniums of the incel army's heads exploding. So Drew, I've got you here as another horror expert in Dave's absence. I'm going to sidetrack you for a second. This episode is going to be airing in October, right in the thick of spooky season, so it's perfectly lined up in our lineup here. One of our show's claims to fame is Nerd Nightmare, a segment where Dave, our resident horror expert, tortures myself, the horror noob, with watching horror classics for the first time. So last week it was a double feature with the original Child's Play and Hellraiser.
Oh,
do you have any memories surrounding those two films?
I'm a big fan of both of those films, probably more Hellraiser than Child's Play, but I am a reasonably big Chucky fan. I love Clive Barker. I think Clive Barker has an imagination like no other. When it comes to designing monsters, you can always tell a Clive Barker monster from anyone else's, because there's going to be that element of shall we say kink to it. And Hellraiser,
you might one might say that.
Yes. Hellraiser is probably the purest distillation of that. My memory of Hellraiser, actually, because I get my love of the horror genre from my father. We don't have a whole lot in common, but we both like scary movies. And when I was a kid, my twin and we absolutely wanted to rent Hellraiser, and my mom told me under no circumstances were we going to rent Hellraiser. So
I can't imagine where she got that inclination.
Yeah, so we went over her head and we rented it with my dad, because my dad wanted to watch it. And my dad is a good church going man, I guess, but like his favorite genre of horror films are like anything vaguely satanic, like The Omen or The Exorcist. He's there. So like he heard that there was hell in the title. We were like, we're watching this. So that's how I saw Hellraiser. Probably too young to see it.
Yeah.
Although I often say, anytime it comes up, I'm like, well, I didn't turn into like a criminal or anything. I just became a comic book writer, like I'm just, if anything is weird, I'm just a little bit too preoccupied with monsters. But, so the Hellraiser franchise is one that I'm very, very fond of, although you not having seen a whole lot of horror films, that's a rough inoculation,
As a psychology nerd, like I'm putting two and two together. There's a reason that like Catholics, Dave is going to love this as a Catholic, in the editing booth, but like there's a reason that Catholics have like the corner market on like horror films. Like there's a definite, lineation here with suppressed some things when it comes to religious behavior and kink and horror. I'm just putting two and two together. I'm using my Columbo skills.
Not wrong. And Hellraiser's good for that. As far as Child's Play goes, I don't remember when I first saw it, but I do have a weird memory of being on the bus when I was a kid, and some kids sitting ahead of me in the bus talking about it because they had seen it and I didn't know what it was, but the kid that was talking about it had a speech impediment, so when he was saying doll, it sounded like he was saying dog. And so like for like about 6 months or so, or however much it was in little kid time, I thought Chucky was a dog that had the spirit of a serial killer put inside of it. So imagine my surprise when I did finally see Child's Play and it was a movie about a killer doll. That first movie is kind of an underrated film, in my opinion. I think it's fairly suspenseful. I don't know what you thought about it, but it's Chucky's definitely an unusual movie star, so to speak.
Well, I had a very complicated experience with Chucky as a whole. My middle name is Charles, and so my dad sometimes calls me Charlie or Chucky. I had one of those My Buddy dolls. And so my mom was like, I remember growing up, my mom was like, that looks just like Chucky. So that gave me all the more reason, one, to chuck that toy across the room, two, to stay far, far away from the movie, even with my previous inclination against horror films. But yeah, so that was very interesting to revisit. One big observation, Dave and I are both huge Trekkers. And so like the Star Trek connection of the lead actress, and I'm blanking on her name right now, is in the mom being in the whale Star Trek film. You're one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah.
And then Garrick, a simple tailor, being the lead actor in Hellraiser was really cool to see.
It's that genre, sci-fi and horror tend to share a lot of actors.
Bleeding lines, yeah.
Yeah. My other relationship with Child's Play, speaking of people who are known for being in genre stuff, isn't with the original. It's with Bride of Chucky, because I have a big, long-standing crush on Jennifer Tilly. So that's
I had a crush on her when there was some random movie in the 90s where like the kids like trapped their parents in the basement because they didn't want them to get divorced or something. Yeah. So I remember her from that movie.
Yeah. See, I had seen her in other things, but there's I'm assuming you have not seen Bride of Chucky.
I have not.
There is an opening sequence. This is her before she gets turned into a doll, mind you. There's an opening sequence where she gets the remains. She breaks into a police evidence lockup and gets the remains of Chucky out of it, but she's wearing this very form-fitting latex dress that's like a little impractical for breaking and entering, but we'll let it slide. And um what can I say? I have a type. So like I was pretty instantly smitten and continue to be so to this day with Jennifer Tilly. But so that's, I guess, my other connection to Child's Play.
It's funny that you say that, but like the 2 years of this experience, I've seen some of the seminal classics, but now that you mention that, it makes me think of how much of a super fan I am, as weird as it may seem, of What We Do in the Shadows. And so now seeing Natasha Demetro as in the doll form as Nadia, that's bringing it back full circle for me.
I can't help but think that they were definitely inspired
Right.
by Child's Play and Chucky and Bride of Chucky. I think that's the thing that's fascinating about those movies, especially as they go on, is
Right.
that you have this character that is essentially become a movie star who is an animatronic doll.
Right.
And
Right.
when he's on screen, he definitely commands your presence. And by the time Bride of Chucky came around, they had given up any pretense of any of the human characters being the star of the movie. Like, Chucky is the star of that movie. And I find that very interesting about the way we can sort of imbue living qualities onto something that is essentially a special effect. And
it's almost like we've jumped the shark. Something along the lines of like the kaiju films of like Godzilla is like,
Yeah.
I remember my biggest Dave and I both, our biggest criticism of Godzilla versus Kong was like, shut up about these humans, we don't care about them.
Yeah. And I mean, of course there's the more wholesome versions of that where you have like things like the Muppets and but as a species, it's fascinating that we can dream up these characters and we create them, out of rubber and latex and animatronics, or digitally on a computer. But we will imbue them with enough life that where we will I bet you there's a ton of people that would say Godzilla is their favorite movie star. I mean,
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, like it's and he is like Godzilla next to James Bond. Godzilla has had more sequels than any other film character.
More connected universes even.
Yeah. I mean, he was doing the shared universe thing back in the 50s and 60s. That's way ahead of Marvel. So I not to get too pretentious about it, but that's one of the things I love about the human race is our capacity for storytelling and our capacity to love characters. I've gone very far afield of horror films at this point.
Okay, so that's the past. We're now looking ahead. This week's nightmare, I haven't watched it yet as of the time of this Big Talk recording, but I'm watching the original Scream for the first time. What is your advice or insight?
That's a good movie, very good movie. I don't think it's going to be as potentially traumatizing as Hellraiser or Child's Play. It's funny for one. It's got a wit about it. The opening sequence is the scariest part. I don't want to spoil too much about it, but if you want to really get yourself spooked, the right way to do it is to make yourself a big bowl of popcorn, wait till nighttime, get into a room with all the lights off, eat your popcorn, and make sure none of your social media, no computers, no phones, like just watch it in one go. And I think that's it's a perfect Halloween time movie. It's very creepy, but it's when I watch scary movies around Halloween, and I would say Scream is this kind of movie, I tend to want to watch the fun scary movies. Like I think of something like the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like, that's a great film but you sort of feel like you need to take a shower after you're done with it. Like, it's very grody. Scream is not like that. Scream is very fun. It's the epitome of a 90s teen slasher, and I think you're going to have a good time watching it. It is scary, but it's definitely not the same kind of scary as Hellraiser, which is just sort of in your face and extremely visceral.
I'm gonna save Dave's bleep button, but as I said last week, it's not scary. It was just bleeping gross.
It is definitely that. I always say that Hellraiser, there's the phrase hell-bent for leather. Hellraiser is hell-bent for leather in the most literal sense of the word. Literal sense of the term, I should say.
All right, let's get back on track. In addition to the Global Comix news and your partnership, are there any future projects that you can tease at the moment?
Well, as far as what's directly coming up, the thing that I was on the show last time, the Halloween Man Meets the Latex Avenger issue, is going to be part of this promotion that I've been talking about. So you'll be able to read what we were talking about, last time I was on the show. But also, there is going to be Halloween Man, the Broken Man, which is a story that I was able to start on Comixology before all the stuff went awry. And now I'm going to be able to complete it, and the entire thing is going to be up there. And it is a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde story. It is, and I always say I want to touch on all the classic monster tropes in Halloween Man. So like I've really put a lot of effort into this story, and it's been frustrating to me that I haven't been able to finish it. And Global Comix is allowing me to do that, and you will be able to read it for free, so you can see what all the hype is about.
Alrighty then. Drew Edwards, writer-creator of Halloween Man, Lucy Chaplin, Science Starlet, thank you so much for your time, sir. Where can we all go to support you and your work?
Well, first of all, you should go to Global Comix, that's with an IX.com, and search Halloween Man comics. You can find the Lucy comics and all the different Halloween Man comics through that right now. As of this recording, they're not all up there, but there is quite a few things that are up there. And as we get into the Halloween season, that catalog is just going to grow and grow and grow and grow until you have, like, you could spend days reading nothing but Halloween Man universe stuff. If you want to find me on social media, on Instagram, I am Drew_Halloween. On Twitter, I am Halloween Man Com, COM, all lowercase, all one word. And if you want to just go to my website, we just relaunched a Halloween Man website. That's halloweenman.com. It'll take you right there. It'll keep you aware of all the news and everything that's coming up down the Halloween Man pipeline.
Thanks again, Drew. All the best to you, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks so much to Drew Edwards, and be sure to head to Global Comix, especially if you're an indie fan. In addition to Halloween Man comics and Lucy Chaplin comics, you're going to see a lot of great stuff from a lot of great indie publishers and indie creators. So if indie comics are your vibe, be sure to head to Global Comix and check that out. When we come back from this, our final break, Nerd Nightmare resumes. All right, we are back here for Nerd Nightmare, and as the horror noob, I will gladly pass the baton to my horror aficionado and co-host, Dave.
Nerd Nightmare. All right, so this week for Nerd Nightmare, we are going to be talking about Scream, the original Scream from 1996, which was directed by Wes Craven, we can say horror royalty when it comes to directing scary movies. It was released on December 20th of 1996 and starred Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, David Arquette, Skeet Ulrich and Matthew Lillard, and had a sort of fake out appearance by one Drew Barrymore. So in this movie, I'm going to read you the official log line here that I found on Google. Wes Craven reinvented and revitalized the slasher horror genre with this modern horror classic, which manages to be funny, clever, and scary as a fried, masked knife maniac stalks high school students in middle-class suburbia. Craven is happy to provide both tension and self-parody as the body count mounts, but the victims aren't always the ones you'd expect. And we did text a little bit about this already, Kris, that this is definitely, a kind of a self-parody in some ways. It's very meta. It's very aware that it is a slasher movie, to the point where even characters within the movie comment that they're trying to follow horror movie rules, so to speak. So it's a different kind of slasher movie and a different approach to that, especially after something like Friday the 13th or Halloween. I'm very, very interested to hear your take on this one.
Well, it was really fascinating because it felt like almost like a time capsule of 1996. Like I felt transported back to that time. I'd be almost interested to see. I know that they had a recent release, like how this takes place in an updated time. With so much of like this being the earliest stages of cell phone usage. They're pulling up cell phone records and cloning a cell phone and all of this stuff. Like, what's the updated version of this? Because this movie felt very, very 1996. I mean, look no further than the cast. I mean, you have Neve Campbell coming off of Party of Five. You have, Courtney Cox and David Arquette, I guess. Is this the movie where they met? Because I know that they were married for a good amount of time.
I want to say yes. I'm not 100%, but I want to say this is where they met.
Yeah. So it was a very interesting experience because I got 20 minutes in, and then particularly the scene where they're sitting at the water fountain, I was just like, dude, is this a satire? I think part of my initial reaction was skewed due to the fact that I did watch the first 3 scary movies, the parodies. And so like that opening scene in particular, I had seen with Carmen Electra being detopped in, I think it was the first or second scary movie. I think it was the first one because the second one opens with the Exorcist spoof, and the second one's probably the best scary movie. But yeah, so that was an interesting kind of lens through which I watched this. I gotta be honest, I think this, of all the Nerd Nightmare films that we viewed, it's the one that I'm most interested on following up to see where this franchise goes. Because it wasn't necessarily scary. I think the meta-ness of it all kind of enticed me. And the last 20 minutes of the film was just genius. Like the entire twist was just fantastic. Now, I say again, what does that look like in 2022? So I'm interested to continue this journey, potentially. I don't know, because I wasn't really scared, but I was very, very intrigued.
Okay, so that's really cool that you say that. I have so many comments here. So strap in. You ready?
Yeah, let's go.
So I'm a big fan of Wes Craven, generally speaking. People Under the Stairs, Nightmare on Elm Street, particularly the first one. Now, we've talked a little bit about the fact that the first Nightmare on Elm Street is trying to be pretty scary, and then after that, sort of slowly devolves into self-parody. But Craven came back to make one more one more Nightmare on Elm Street, and it was called Wes Craven's New Nightmare. And what is fascinating about this is that it sort of feels a little bit like a fairy tale. And it is not the usual Freddy Krueger. It tries to sort of return him to these scary roots. And in order to do that, Craven decides to take an extremely meta approach. So to me, Wes Craven's New Nightmare is sort of the precursor of what would become Scream. And in it, you have the actors that performed in the original Nightmare on Elm Street. Their lives are slowly becoming turned topsy-turvy because the entity that is the real Freddy Krueger, not, some child killer that was killed or something, but like a supernatural entity is slowly coming into the real world and is terrorizing them. So you basically have Wes Craven playing a version of himself in the movie, Heather Langenkamp is playing a version of herself in the movie, and these horrific things, which didn't really happen to them, obviously start happening. And so it's a very meta look at acting, at scary movies, at how being in a scary movie can affect your life and people's obsession with scary movies. And that meta approach then worked incredibly well, and he kind of followed that up eventually with the first Scream, which is, as you mentioned, incredibly meta movie. It's pretty suspenseful, I think. I think the problem, of course, is, as you said, it's been parodied. It had such a huge cultural impact that it's been parodied about 8 trillion times. So to transport you back for a second, when you see that opening scene, which features Drew Barrymore, it's a very, very tense scene when you're not familiar with the parody of it. On top of that, Drew Barrymore was on the poster for this movie. So the general expectation as sort of the biggest name in the movie was that she was going to star. And then they killed her off in the opening sequence, and you're just kind of sitting there going, what the heck just happened? And I think that's part of what makes the movie work, is sort of these genre inversions, right? Like how often, in a Halloween or a Friday the 13th would a character say, listen, if this is a scary movie, you cannot go in there because you are going to be dead, that whole bluntness and being able to take scenarios and kind of twist them around a little bit. And then the ending, as you mentioned, which is fantastic. I will say that we had a 2022 Scream. It was a little different because it did not actually have Wes Craven involved, since he's since passed away. And although it features some of the original characters, it is also sort of a passing of the torch to sort of a new generation. And I have to say, I quite liked it. And some of the things that you bring up, like, what does it look like with, cell phones? There's a great scene where a cell phone literally causes somebody's death. It's perfectly incorporated. It's pretty heart wrenching, man. It twists it very well around and updates it for modern times. I will say also that the first 3 Scream movies are technically supposed to be like a trilogy, right? And then they came back, and Wes Craven made one more, Scream 4, that was trying to again play with audience expectations. And I liked it okay. And now this most recent one, I think, was a really cool passing of the torch. So we're basically at like 5 Scream movies right now. But I if you want more of the same, 2 and 3, and if you want to start seeing them play with what Scream could mean in a more modern setting, then 4 and 5 are the ones you want to look at. The most recent one impressed me more than I thought it would. It was very much directed with like a love towards Wes Craven and how he did things, and did a decent job of updating it. I'm a big fan of the Scream franchise because I've always enjoyed, those 70s, 80s slashers movies that, they're kind of starting to play with here and kind of commenting on. So if you're really familiar with like the Halloween films and the Friday the 13th films, then so many moments of what they do in here really resonates, which makes me wonder, Kris, what incarnation were you doing watching the scary movie parodies if you've never watched scary movies? Like, how can you enjoy a parody of something where you've never watched the original? What were you thinking, dude?
My best friend in middle school was like, you're a little diminutive, that I'll remove in the interest of keeping our PG rating if you don't watch this with me. So peer pressure, completely, wholeheartedly. And also I was such a huge fan of the Wayans brothers, and when I saw them attached, I was like, okay, yeah, I'm watching this. I will say that, was this, correct me if I'm wrong, I even remember this at the time, was MTV part of this production? Were they involved in that?
I honest to God don't remember. 96 was, 96, I'm still in Germany, man. So I probably would have not been too familiar with whatever in the world MTV was doing.
I think part of the reason that kind of desensitized it for me and sterilized it, made it not scary, was the ridiculous bombastic music. Like, it would just be like this pastoral view of this sleepy town, and then it would be like this huge orchestral number that completely just takes you out of it. And it was really funny. Jamie Kennedy's character was hilarious. Randy, I think is his name, is like, as he's explaining the rules. I think one of the interesting observations too is like it was meta even down to like the tropes of it all, and like it was so foreshadowed, like intentionally, that made it funny. Like you knew, like the delay on the camera that they had in the living room at the party, you knew that was going to come to play into effect.
Absolutely.
And it was
Absolutely.
it was still hilarious. Like it was part of it, and like it was great. So I think it straddled the line to where like I'm like, is this good? Like it was so like meta, and it was so in your face with the like the self-parody and the self-flagellation of it all. I was just like, is this a good movie? But then like, so I was unsure for the first half, but then that second half and you get the twist, it's just fantastic. And it's just, I will say the hardest part for me was seeing Matthew Lillard be a doucher, because I love Matthew Lillard to the moon and back. There's a particular video where he's at like some con or like fan expo, and like this little girl's like a huge fan of his, but she's crying because she's scared. And he like sits down on the floor with her and uses the shaggy voice. And I'm not even like the biggest Scooby-Doo person, but I just love Matthew Lillard as a person. And so it was disorienting to see him play such a horrible, horrible person.
And he did it so well.
I know. Oh my God, he's so good. I think the world of him.
Yeah, I would be very interested, perhaps in a future Nerd Nightmare or something, to do another Scream, or maybe even we do an episode where we just say, screw it, we're gonna watch the rest of the Scream movies and just kind of talk about how they all come together, because it's a very, very cool series. And even when it doesn't perfectly click, it is still interesting. Like they're still experimenting and messing around and trying to play with the formula of what made a slasher movie, and I always appreciate that. So I'm a fan of this whole series, and I'm a massive fan of Wes Craven. So, and anytime I get to see a Wes Craven movie is a good day.
I think for me, I've been able, it's only taken me 2 years, but I think I'm starting to diagnose what scares me. And I think it's the jump scares. Insidious was the most terrified I've been during this entire encounter. And I'm interested to see, next week we're looking at A Quiet Place. So we can kind of divorce ourselves from like these preconceived notions, the satire, the scary movie of it all. I've seen all that played out. I've seen enough in like memes and pop culture to know like the basics of A Quiet Place. But other than that, I'm going in pretty cold. So this should probably be terrifying.
Well, I mean, is it the scariest movie ever made? No, but it's a great movie as far as ratcheting up tension. It's a very tense movie. I think you're going to appreciate that. I really do recommend watching this one like with the lights out, and it's quiet in the house, because it kind of captures that vibe that the movie is going for really well. I have never been in a more quiet theater than I have been watching A Quiet Place. You could hear a pin drop in that theater. It was really cool. It was one of the most atmospheric communal movie experiences I think I've had.
My only problem is like when I watch these movies, like it'll get to that heightened suspense moment, and then the kids will walk in like, "Daddy, what you watching?" I'm like, "Go away!" So I'm like, I'm not trying to traumatize them. So I'm very much
just yourself, right?
Dad. Yeah. Just self-flagellation, to bring that term back up. Yeah. All right, that wraps up this week's Nerd Nightmare. What are your thoughts on Scream? What's your relationship with it? Be sure to give us your reactions on the post. And we thank you so much for listening. Be sure to visit us next week as we look at A Quiet Place. And be sure to give us a rating and review on your favorite podcasting platform. Hit that subscribe button. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, or nerdbyword.com.
And find us on social media, because we love to hear from you. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at nerdbyword, or individually at thatnerddave and at thatnerdchris. And of course, we have a totally awesome link tree in our bio, where you can find the easiest way to subscribe to our podcast, a link to our Discord, merch. if you want some pretty cool Byword swag, whatever you need, you can find it in our link tree.
And be sure to go to Global Comix and support Drew and other cool indie creators. And as always, stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Kris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez, with additional drops composed by Joe Biondi. Our show art is by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.